Hi, Roy here on my channel of BookTube. Roy reads anything. So here we have infinitely superior title card from the crafting pans of Dr. Jenny.
I thank you.
So
Thank you.
thank you for that.
You're
Yes.
welcome.
And what's it about? It's about old books that are strange or interesting or just weird. And right, normally I hurl these aside as if they're valueless, whereas this one will be treated with appropriate respect. Yes, okay, so doing a recent reads kind of thing. Things I've finished up over the last week. So, finished The Prisoner of Zenda. The Prisoner of Zenda, which was a group read in Roger's Cheap Old Book Club as realised on Michael K. Vaughan's channel. So, Prisoner of Zenda, I bought as an old book, which was still cheap, and lots I loved just about it as a physical thing. Just one thing is, printing was different in these days, so it was, with the little metal letters, it was actual type, like pressing into the paper. You can actually feel the bumps of the letters, which is kind of cool. If I had like the super senses of Matt Murdock, I'd be able to read it without actually opening my eyes. Um, anyway, yes, as a story, fantastic adventure story. Can see why it's a classic, and really enjoyed reading it. Probably not too much of a spoiler to say it's about an English guy who, because of a family resemblance to um, the guy who's supposed to be crowned king of a country, Ruritania, he ends up substituting for him, and there's all sorts of adventures to rescue the king, and there's falling in love with princesses and all that kind of stuff. Um, and I think one of the big achievements of Prisoner of Zenda, Anthony Hope, was to create a genre, the Ruritanian romance. Whether it's a love romance or an adventure romance, or as in this, both. So Ruritania is a European country of slightly unspecified location that's got a kind of Tyrolean kind of flavour. There's forests, kind of fairy tales type castles, and lots of obviously it's a monarchy, otherwise no story, um, and intrigue and kind of what's the word? Kind of betrayals and melodramatic events are sort of part of the natural events of the country. And it's like as soon as the guy crosses the border, it's like it turns into that kind of story. When he's back in England, he's back in society. It's constrained, those things. Was it a dream? Um, so the idea of Ruritania, I think that really caught on, that sort of background for adventure stories. Lots of examples of that, but and you still see it. I think the made up countries in those daft Christmas rom-coms like Christmas Prince and Princess Switch, that they are Ruritania. Really, it just takes that as a ready-made, and uses it, which made me think. This was come out in 1893 or 4. Um, the 1890s, very beginning of the 20th century as well. In that time, there seem to have been lots of books coming out that have sort of created basically genres or subgenres. Dracula came out. Obviously, that's hugely influential on horror and supernatural stories. A lot of groundbreaking science fiction. Not that things weren't invented completely then. I mean, Frankenstein was Frankenstein, for instance, the, the beginning of the 19th century. But then you've got H.G. Wells bringing in sort of new sorts of SF ideas. Um, Lost Race stories through H. Rider Haggard, um, detectives. You know, Sherlock Holmes wasn't the first detective, but sort of crystallized lots of things in a way that we're still seeing now, and on and on and on. Fantasy, imaginary world fantasies. So I was, um, did I say Lost Worlds? Yes. Yes, I was, as an apprentice reader, trained to believe that William Morris invented the imaginary world or quest or epic fantasy. Again, 1890s. Now, you could debate that. In fact, there's a really interesting fantasy book called Phantasmion that came out in, again, the early part of the 19th century by Sarah Coleridge that could maybe get the crown of being the first imaginary world fantasy. But William Morris was doing his stuff shortly after that, Lord Dunsany. So that period, some reason, the crucible of lots of fiction types that we still read now. It's an idea I'm giving to you. What else have I read? I read a James Blish book, Black Easter. Black Easter or Faust Aleph Null by James Blish. Um, and this was recommended by Mr. A subscriber when I'd been reading some black magic stuff. So this is it science fiction? I think it's a horror story, a supernatural horror story treated as science fiction. So it's like based on voluminous knowledge. James Blish has worked out what would it mean and what would be the implications if the stuff in real real as it were occult manuals and grimoires, not made up ones like the Necronomicon, but the sort of ones that actually exist. What if all that stuff was true and could actually work? And there's an amazing story about there's a kind of an arms dealer guy who commissions a sorcerer to unleash all the demons of hell. Is what happens. It's quite alarming, really. It's not a documentary, but yes. So James Blish, fantastic. I've only really read his Star Trek novelizations, a completely opposite thing. I'm glad to say there's a sequel, The Day After Judgment, because we're kind of left in a pretty alarming place in the old Black Easter there. So look forward to reading more of that. And there are other related books as well, which I also have. Um, Stay there, Wonder Woman. Yes, so his Dr. Mirabilis historical novel about Roger Bacon and his science fiction novel set in the far future, A Case for Conscience, are part of a related set of books. I'll get to all of those at some point. I think you can buy them all in one volume. Okay, other thing I've been reading is stuff I came across in my course. I'm doing a 19th century studies course. This current module, Entertaining the Victorians, and 1 week of that was about comic papers, which includes things like satirical magazines like Punch, but also we got into this guy, Ali Sloper. So Ali Sloper knew the name and knew that he had this kind of status as being the first comic character in the sense of the first sort of serialized, illustrated comic person. That's probably something you can explore as to what actually do you mean by first. But certainly in terms of having like his own regular strips and then his own magazine, that seems to have been a first. So this Ali Sloper, who's a kind of disreputable everyman, with his alarming looking drinker's nose, and this whole family of characters around him. Really interesting when you get into it. as with a lot of humour of the time, it's like, what are they going on about? You know, if it's like, yeah, let's take a pop at William Gladstone. Well, you got to, you need to know some of the background as well. But yes, Ali Sloper. So based on that, and based, I thought I was interested enough to go into it a bit more just for fun. So that's why I bought Victorian Comics by Denis Gifford. So Denis Gifford, he used to always be on radio and TV talking about comics or movies or other sort of nostalgia things. He meant to bring this down. He did a book about horror movies that I got when I was like 13. So I read his book, A Pictorial History of Horror Movies, before I could see any horror movies. So I already knew lots and lots of things about them before I started watching them on late night showings on television. Um, anyway, Gifford really into his comics and a sort of popular historian. This is like an anthology with not just Ali Sloper, lots of other characters from the time. So that's an old book from 1976 I picked up. Also from 1976, and again related to Denis Gifford, he brought out what he called a comic magazine called Ali Sloper. So Ali Sloper's Half Holiday originally ran, I think, 1867, was it? Ran through until 1916, kind of popped back in the early 1920s, and then there were single issue revivals in the 40s, and then in the 70s these four Ali Sloper magazines. So he's more of the figurehead, but still got the editorial cartoon kind of approach that you got in the original publications, and the rest of it is some of it's nostalgia, like reprints of old comics, and some of it is current artists of the 70s, British comics artists, doing new little short strips like this Joel the Northman. And it ran for grand total of 4 issues. I could see why it maybe wouldn't achieve a mass market. It's sort of aimed at adults, really. Um, kind of a mixture, you know, if you want adventure strips or science fiction comics, then you'd probably buy those. If you want sort of underground comics, you'd buy those. If you want nostalgic reprints from the war, you'd want those. You know, it's sort of an odd mixture of things that Gifford was into, really. But lots of cool stuff. So the final 2 pages, very much of their time. 1976, you get a not very amusing page of stuff about the Sex Pistols, and you get a sketch that Jack Kirby had done of Ali Sloper at a comics convention. So it's like the legendary Jack Kirby drawing the original comics character. So that's kind of cool in the sort of don't cross the streams sense. So yes, Ali Sloper. Other stuff too, like there's a feminist strip called The Muzz's Muse, where the sort of Greek goddesses reappear in kind of amusing feminist scenarios. Yeah, Dr. Jenny approves. It's got the seal of the what's the matriarch? What's the opposite of the patriarchy then?
Matriarchy.
Is it the matriarchy though?
Possibly. I don't know. I only did women's studies. What am I supposed to know? I have a feeble woman's brain, pity say.
Yeah. What can you do? Okay.
I did make you a nice slide, though.
You did. Let's see that again as the outro slide. Roy reads anything in gold, not gold leaf. I didn't, but it's.
No, you didn't merit gold leaf.
Yeah, maybe next time. There's two shades of gold.
2 shades of gold and a black pen underneath.
Yeah, I think I'm going to settle on this one now rather than devastating their stocks of cardboard by doing a new one each time.
It was only a bit of scrap paper.
that a beginning of a limerick?
Could be, yeah.
Right. Okay. As usual, there's been a gentle collapse of the narrative, so I'm going to finish now. See you in a bit.